All right, well, if you were reading the papers this morning or looking online, you would have seen everywhere the full list of Australia Day honours. One notable political figure honoured, of course, was Malcolm Turnbull, who was made a Companion of the Order of Australia. So that's the AUST. Now, in an interview with the Nine newspapers marking his award, the former Prime Minister had plenty to say about, well, you guessed it, climate policy. Joining me now from Sydney to discuss all of this and more, Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, great to have you on the show for 2021 on a Tuesday, as always. Malcolm Turnbull today says the Morrison government will come under greater pressure from the Biden administration, no doubt directly from the new climate czar, John Kerry, to sign up to net zero emissions. He's not the first to say this. Now, despite the government ensuring Australia is one of only a handful of nations actually doing what they promised in relation to the 2030 commitments, forget all of that, says the critics. We're all now talking about 2050 ahead of the climate summit in Glasgow. Do you think the PM's going to buckle to this pressure?
Well, I think the PM's going to change his language and his stance somewhat, but not as much as people like Malcolm Turnbull think. And if you want a reason for that, you just need to look at Jonathan Lee's report about the Nationals and how far they want to take things in the other direction. So Scott Morrison has handled this issue pretty well with both those Liberal and National Party rooms, Peter. I think everyone would agree. And he knows that with the Biden administration, he'll have to change tack a bit, but not as much as some people like Malcolm Turnbull would hope. I mean, Anthony Albanese said to me the other day, he said he'll commit to net zero by 2050 by the end of the year. Scott Morrison, he believes, will. Well, it's been put to me. There was a phone call between the Energy Minister, Angus Taylor, and John Kerry, the US presidential envoy on climate change, the other day. It was quite cordial. They both spoke about technology, not taxation, which is the government's slogan. And Kerry wasn't demanding anything. He was simply trying to re-engage, given the US aren't even in the Paris Agreement or haven't been. So the Australian government's pretty optimistic that it can forge ahead with the US on this without going as far to the left as some people hope.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of international hypocrisy around this 2050 target. I'll pick that up with Matt Canavan in just a moment. I want to go to another interesting moment today, one of those issues about national identity that come up time and time again. Of course, a poll overnight from Ipsos, this time on the Republic. 40% of Australians, the poll reports, oppose a republic. Just 34% are in favour. And only a quarter of Australians aged between 18 and 25 support ditching the monarchy, meaning almost three-quarters don't. Now, according to Ipsos, this is the lowest level of support for a republic that they've recorded since 1979. Pretty bad numbers there for the Republican movement, Andrew. And I have to say they would be surprised, I suspect, about the view or lack of enthusiasm from young people. Is this ARM movement dead in the water, or at least are they dead in the water while they keep getting the whole show run by left-leaning elites?
Well, I think they are dead in the water from that. I was surprised by the results. I might note, Peter, that that's about the Labor primary vote, 34% the yes vote, so there you go. Turnbull, I guess one of the big criticisms of him as Prime Minister, he didn't go for victory or death. He believed in a number of things, including the Republic, and he wanted to keep the right happy, so he never expressed that. His big wish, of course, in '99 was the Republic. If he had to push that along a bit as Prime Minister, it would probably have more support. It needs a leader of a party to push it, and but particularly people in government to push it for it to come to fruition. I suspect it's further away than it ever has been. From that poll, it looks further away than it did even after the unsuccessful Republican referendum of '99.
Yeah, well, just let me make a point there, and this will sound like an oxymoron, because I think it's only ever going to get up if it's pushed by a Conservative. And a very different definition of a Conservative is someone who supports the constitutional monarchy, or at least the status quo of our constitutional arrangements. But it's like so many things, you know, I think the changes that Abbott proposed to the Constitution in relation to recognition of Aboriginal Australians, I think put by a Conservative government led by a Conservative, these things have a chance of success. I just can't see that a left-leaning Malcolm Turnbull or a Labor Party can actually pull this off, because it's not just the right of the party that Malcolm Turnbull had to keep happy. He had to keep happy the Australian public. And you can see from previous referendums. You can see certainly from that poll, they're not there yet by a long shot. By a long shot. And I think this is where you know, the elites here, and there's more of them running the ARM as there is in the past when Turnbull's there. I think they forget where real Australians are on this issue, Andrew.
Well, maybe they should all do what I did and live in Britain for a couple of years and get called a convict, and then they'd be a lot more Republican. But look, I think that you raise a very good point. Referendums in Australia, typically they are bipartisan support is the only way to get them up. And in the same way that Labor can often get away with more privatisation or with an economic reform,
correct,
that a Conservative can't. Yeah, if you sort of campaigning against your base, you can actually be successful. I mean, that really does sound counterintuitive, doesn't it? But there's elements in history where that occurs, and incumbency in government allows you to have the authority to carry that through.
Right, just before we head off, Bill Shorten has now ruled out a run for the Labor leadership. I've been around long enough not to believe politicians who say they're not going to run for the leadership. I think he's just, well, he didn't stay in the parliament to be Anthony Albanese's shadow minister. Let's just leave it there. But I want to get your sense on Tanya Plibersek. I've seen a real lift, certainly in media effort from her in the last few months.
Yeah, she's saying, I'm here, I'll take the job if required. If Anthony Albanese doesn't lift performance, if we look like we're going to go backwards, I'm here and I'm ready. I think that's where we're at, not at a challenge stage, but she's probably the main person who's doing that. You don't see Jim Chalmers doing that. You see a little bit of Chris Bowen doing that. Tanya Plibersek's the main person. Shorten, from what I'd heard in Canberra the last couple of months at the end of the year there, Peter, of course he still wants to be leader. He's not silly enough to think he can be leader for this election. So, yes, he still has a desire to be leader. Of course he does. Whether he'll ever get there, well, that's a much more difficult question, because the lay membership of the party, I'm not sure they'd support him after 2 losses, and we know about that particular voting system. Of course, Tanya Plibersek was his deputy. I'd imagine he would support Tanya Plibersek to be leader, but the New South Wales right are not talking about supporting Tanya Plibersek as leader, and that's her biggest challenge to becoming leader at the moment. Things can change, as you know. Depends what happens as the political year unfolds, Peter.
And watch this space as to how much media she does in coming months. Andrew Cornell, thank you as always.
Thanks, Peter.